Hello and welcome to the big picture. Faced with an ever-growing and strengthening BJP, a weakening Congress, and their own party's future in doldrums, the leaders of the erstwhile Janata Dal, or Parivar as it is called, seem to be attempting a reunification. It was almost a quarter century ago that the erstwhile Janata Dal, which headed the National Front government under VP Singh, started disintegrating. It split into several independent parties, leading to bitter rivalries among them. The original Janata Party and its later avatar, Janata Dal, which was built on an anti-Congress platform, started floundering as Congress also weakened. Now with the BJP sweeping election after election and spreading its wings dramatically, the Janata Parivar leaders are feeling the sting. Now they are attempting an anti-BJP platform. What are the challenges before these leaders in bringing these disparate forces together? And what is the potential of such a reunification if it happens? We will discuss this today with Pavan Verma, Janata Dal-U MP, Manoj Kumar Jha, National Spokesperson of the Rashtriya Janata Party, Rashtriya Janata Dal, on phone line, Purshotham Aggarwal, political analyst and a former professor at the JNU, Neelabh Mishra, editor of the Hindi Outlook, and Smita Gupta, associate editor of the Hindu. Welcome to all of you. Dr. Aggarwal, I would like to come to you first.
Yeah.
Do you see this attempt which is on now for reunification as some kind of a survival strategy, or is it an act of desperation?
It is both. It is both. And it is good in the sense that whether Janata Parivar or other Parivars or whatever, people with similar political ideologies, with similar political outlooks, if they come together, it is good for the democracy and democratic system as a whole. The problem, however, in these attempts is that these leaders have many inflated egos. That is number one. Even today, they are uniting on an anti-platform. They are uniting because of the, as you put it, because of the spread of BJP, not because of a positive program, not because of a kind of inner compulsion to provide an alternative political program. So I think at the moment it is just an act of desperation. It can become politically meaningful in the long run only if they have the capacity, intellectual as well as political, to come up with alternative set of policies. Because they actually claim to be the third force, anti-Congress, anti-BJP, then what are the alternative set of policies? And more importantly, what are the alternative set of practices? So the history of these various leaders and their parties, to be very frank, is not very reassuring.
It's not very reassuring. Yes, we will come to the other aspects of it. Let me get the two party spokespersons on the panel. Pavan Verma, you heard what Dr. Purshotham Aggarwal says.
Yes.
So, is it an act of desperation?
I wonder why something should be called an act of desperation when it is an attempt to build an opposition within a democracy. This kind of quick labels that if some parties, and there is always a scope and a space for a democratic opposition within a democracy, if there is any attempt to forge one, it is looked upon as an act of desperation, because it almost seems to be that some people believe that the BJP has an ordained right to rule without anyone putting across some system of scrutiny or accountability or checks and balances to their policy.
Pavan, sorry to intervene. I mean, the issue of BJP does not come here. The history of the leaders who are now attempting this reunification is what creates this doubt, what creates this cynicism.
In fact, I welcome personally this move.
But there is I'm sure you understand the background and the history of these parties and the leaders.
The audio. I cannot hear anything. I'm sorry, Girish, I can't hear you because the audio is very poor.
Aja, let me try again. I said I intervened only to remind you that, nobody is opposed to any creation of a new political party or a grouping. But the problem is the history of these leaders and the history of these parties. I think there's a problem there. We'll get back to Manoj Kumar Ja. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, the same question which I asked Pavan Verma.
Look, I somehow feel, Purshotham, you said that it's all on negation. But negation of negation is very important in political dynamism. I tell you, 26th May onwards, suddenly a major section of the media started writing a collective epitaph about all regional outfits from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, because an avatar had arrived. I'm sorry, this is not the logic of democracy, Girish. You know something? We have a very positive agenda. What has happened? That here is a person and his politics, which is nothing but an excellent music exclusively to the ears of corporates. Setting aside the people on the margin, the communities on the margins, should we simply sit down, sit quietly and allow this politics to continue? Blackening the entire history of progressive politics. I think history should treat us favorably, media should treat us favorably. It is not easy for any political party to come out of constricted, violent memories of past. Yet we have come. And we have come together. It's not simply coming together of individual leaders. It's coming together of a collective plank. And we have decided that we'll not allow this kind of uncritical adulation of Amit Shah ji or Modi ji or BJP for that matter. India is very large.
Okay.
We have our own space.
Manoj Kumar Ja, I think we take your point well. And I'm glad that you yourself mentioned about the past. What you dubbed it as constrictive and violent past, of your party. I'm glad at least that you have accepted that there is a serious problem as far as the past is concerned. We'll come back to it, and that seems to be one of the challenges. That's what we're actually discussing today. What are the challenges which you people will face in reunification? Yes,
I was
Mr.
just
Aggarwal.
saying that, in fact, I welcome this for the simple reason that people with similar political ideologies or supposedly similar political ideologies, if they come together, it is good for democracy as a whole. The point, however, is the alternative set of policies and practices. And it is on this count that I do not find history very assuring.
Let me get, I think we have got Pavan Verma back. Pavan, see, the question is, what are the challenges which you will face? Because as Professor Aggarwal pointed out, there are huge egos involved. The only reason, if you see the last 25 years of the history of Janata Parivar, it is the egos which created all these fissures in the party and led to bitter rivalries. You think that all the leaders are prepared to bury their past and bury their egos?
Now, let me put this in perspective, Girish. First of all, 1977, when the Janata Party came into being, it took on a party which was considered to be near invincible, which was the Congress Party, and managed to dislodge it after the emergency. Now, history is not written in stone, and nobody can say that mistakes were not made or there are areas that if this experiment is ever replicated in today's context, there are not challenges which we will need to overcome. I am merely saying to you that in a democracy, there should be a democratic opposition which is able to put the government to scrutiny in areas of importance. Now, this kind of political configuration is important only if its coming together is also based on some ideological framework which is relevant and to which all parties subscribe.
Absolutely.
And to my mind, I am very clear. I think all these parties must give primary proof of three pillars of this ideological framework. First is growth with justice or inclusive growth, that is to ensure that economic development per se is not enough unless it touches the poorest of the poor and percolates down to those who are underprivileged and needy. Secondly, in our country, I think any policies which militate against religious and social harmony, I know the word secularism is not very fashionable with the ruling dispensation now, but certainly policies which preserve the plurality and diversity of India, which involve respect of each faith and which preserve religious and social harmony are important to this country. In fact, I would go to the third, linking it with the second point, that no governance is possible in India unless there is religious and social harmony.
Okay.
The two notions are two sides of the same coin. So
Okay.
we have an ideological framework.
Okay.
Now, if we are going to be judged primarily by what happened in 1977, then I think it's unfair.
Okay.
Let us wait, let
No,
us
no,
observe, and let us see
Pavan,
where this formation which goes.
Pavan, I think you have made very interesting points there. Smita, at least you think the real, I mean, you have been covering them in the last few days also, your reports have appeared, and I'm sure you have been meeting them and things like that. Do you see a resolve? Do you see a hope? Do you see that, they are all ready to bury their egos?
I think to a large extent they are. And I think also, I think Professor Aggarwal pointed out the challenges. So I'll point out some of the positives. I mean, I agree with him.
Challenges will come to the positive. I want to know, because the 3 points which Pavan Verma pointed out is a very important thing.
I think it's the first time since 1989 when at least 5 or 6 of them, JDU, RJD, Samajwadi Janata Party and INLD, have decided that they will merge. I mean, it's on the cards.
You are forgetting Janata Dal Secular, the party which gave the Prime Minister.
Beg your pardon.
Janata Party.
Yeah,
and
I
also
mentioned that. Yeah. So the merger is very much on the cards because you see, as Professor Aggarwal pointed out, it's a question of survival. They have realized that they have frittered away all that they had. Because if you look at the figures, post 1989, once they started breaking up, fracturing into smaller parties, they used to maintain, if you added up all their MPs, they used to maintain around 100 odd MPs. But if you look at this parliament, if you don't include Biju Janata Dal, which is also part of the Parivar, they're only down to 15.
But it is not part of this attempt.
No, but they do mean to talk to them, but I don't think it will be part of the merger. They are down to 15 or 16 in the 15 in Lok Sabha. 15 in Lok Sabha, and it will become double that in the Rajya Sabha. So they are near extinction.
Absolutely.
Plus, they have 2 state governments to protect. Samajwadi Party government in Uttar Pradesh, which goes to the polls in a couple of years, and Bihar government in next year. So it's a question of survival. Secondly, I do agree with Mr. Verma that this Janata Parivar, despite its negatives, has played a very important role as an opposition to successive
earlier the Congress.
But I think the real challenge now, apart from everything else, is that there was a certain freshness to some of these faces when you and I, Girish, were covering them 25 years ago.
The faces which we see on the board
they are the same faces. So I think they need to, apart from that framework of policies, etc., they need to reinvent themselves. Politics today is very different from what it was in 1989 and even more different from when it was 1970.
Even in the mid-90s, it was completely different. Yes, Neelabh? Challenges?
Challenges, yes, personal egos, but I think there is, one thing which I would like to point out, it's not just the survival of these parties, but the survival also of social bases.
Their respective social bases.
Social bases which is being threatened.
Right.
For instance, middle farmers. For instance, you, in the old terminology, secularism, meaning that plank is especially in UP.
I don't think it's old, it's still relevant.
It's still relevant. But since Pavan Verma said he would like to use a new term, but I think that term also needs reiteration in the present context. And the third is also, social bases in terms of caste. And there are straws in the wind, because I feel that even in the bureaucracy, as we are sitting, there is some stirring in the bureaucrats who represent these social bases. And for instance, I got an invitation and a text message from one of these bureaucrats about, the meeting they are holding. So it's not just that, it's a wider context in which they are operating. But I don't know whether the leadership, it is framed in some older context, and for the others it might be a sense of survival or desperation, but JDU has also shown a drive in the sense that it had at some point of time in its leadership an eye on Delhi too, which is now throttled by this avalanche of
The BJP,
Modiism,
yes.
the BJP. So they have shown some drive in recent years of getting out of the old mold, but the others haven't. For instance, INLD or RJD or Janata Dal S or even Samajwadi Party, they haven't shown that drive yet. Akhilesh did try to do that, but it floundered on many things. So they would have, the challenge is that they would have to take into account this. The other challenge which is there, socialists in the past, even when they were dividing in the 50s and 60s, it's not just a question of ego. There was some bug out there in the 50s and 60s when they were, splitting again and then coming together again, SSP, PSP, SP, things like that, KMPP. You had all such things. So they have, and in that, but even through all that, individual liberty was a plank on which they never compromised, whether it be Jayaprakash Narayan or Ram Manohar Lohia or anything, and that is what is going to be threatened, not by the state. Anti-Congressism was based on, that threat to individual liberty by the state, not only just by the state, but also by marauding mobs. So they would have to take a stand there.
They would have to take a stand there. That's very interesting. Dr. Manoj Kumar Jha.
Yeah.
Manoj, the question is this, that are these leaders, are these leaders who live in the past, as most of us have seen, whether they have realized that they need to reinvent themselves, whether they have realized that it's a completely new world in which they are going to be operating, and coming together means a whole lot of things. What kind of a reinvention you think can be possible with these kind of leaders?
I tell you, let me first give you a compliment because I think very few media spaces are available where at least people are talking about this coming together with sympathy. We have only got disdain so far. That is number one. Number two, we are certainly, the very fact that we have moved ahead, it is not that we are reinventing wheel. If Pavan Verma ji and I talk of a socialism today, it is not exactly socialism of 1950s or 60s. We know that this is neoliberal times. You have to redraw the contours of socialism. You have to draw in new classes which are vulnerable, but a new terminology has to be evolved. And I tell you, I think we are on the right track. Yes, there have been, I said in my opening remark, that we have had a difficult past. We splintered, but at the same time, we have learned from the past. And it is not, I would never accept it as desperation, as for survival. We are not fighting for our survival. We are fighting for the very survival of those ideals, which suddenly, even Pavan Verma ji said, that it is no more fashionable. I mean, it haunts us that in a country, Nehru has become a persona non grata in the public memory. What kind of ideas are we shaping in these times? And that makes a case of our coming together.
Okay.
That's the case.
Okay. Let me get Professor Aggarwal. Professor Aggarwal, with very interesting words, interesting thoughts there, but the practicality of the whole thing.
You see, the point is that, let me make it absolutely
because
clear.
what he says, the ideas which have got in the present day, those ideals and ideas have gone out of fashion. They want to bring it back into fashion.
Well,
Is it,
that's precisely the point. I mean, the intentions are really very noble. The point is that what is going to be the practice? You see, this is absolutely true that Indian democracy is facing an unprecedented situation, if not unprecedented threat. I mean, a party like BJP, which was actually not given to the cult of personality, which was an organization-oriented party, is now fast turning itself into a personality-oriented party.
Right.
For good or for bad, I don't want to go into that at that moment. So this is one interesting development as I see it. Secondly, there is certainly, and this has been the agenda of RSS ever since it was established in 1925, they have their own idea of India, which is in direct contradiction with the prevalent idea of India. Let us say Gandhian, Nehruvian, left, liberal kind of idea of India. Therefore, I welcome any such move which is aimed at strengthening this liberal, democratic, secular, and I have no hesitation in using the word secular, because I think the very idea of India is defined by this much maligned term, secularism. So, this idea has to be reiterated. Fair
Girish,
enough.
may I come in?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm coming to you. I'm coming to you, Pavan.
I take that point, and it is in this context that I welcome this development. But unfortunately, being a student of history, I cannot but draw lessons and precautions from history. I mean, the fact remains that in 1989, the Janata Dal government or the National Front government, whatever it was called, was being supported on one hand by the left and on the other hand by the BJP. Because then the idea was to be anti-Congress.
Right.
Now the idea is to be anti-BJP.
Right.
I am only submitting that unless you give your thought to a kind of evolution of a positive political program, alternative political practices which are in tune with time, which are not just in a kind of time wrap of 50s and 60s and all that kind of things, unless you do that,
Okay.
this move is going to be seen as a mere matter of survival, driven by the fact that you now have only 15 Lok Sabha members.
Right. Pavan,
So that
the
is the
reality is that, the space has shrunk like nobody's business, 15 MPs, that is the reality in which you will have to work, right?
No, Girish, you are a seasoned commentator, and I want to really put the very commendable victory of the BJP in the last parliamentary elections in perspective. The BJP won an absolute majority. We congratulated them, we wish them well. But it is also a fact that no other political party has ever won an absolute majority on its own in the past with such a low percentage of electoral support, which in this case averaged around 31%. Secondly, there are large parts of India where the BJP's presence is either absent or negligible, or certainly not significant. So it is not that today in the first past the post system, we have a government that has completely obliterated the space for an opposition, however weakened it may appear to on the surface.
Right.
And there is also, more importantly, the need for that opposition. I ask you a simple question, that we need that opposition in order to be able to interrogate the current government on the gulf between what it promised during the elections and what it has delivered. What has happened to the control of the rising prices?
Pavan,
What has happened to
let us
the
not get
problem of job creation?
Pavan, sorry.
What has happened? Just a second.
Pavan, sorry. That is not the focus of this discussion.
What has happened
we will have
on the issue of black
a
money?
separate discussion on that.
So, I'm just saying.
Nobody is denying. Nobody is denying.
Therefore, I was only linking this.
Absolutely.
I was only linking this to the relevance of this opposition.
Absolutely. The relevance of the opposition, there is no doubt about it. Smita, the question is this, whatever Pavan is saying that, the need for an opposition and things like that, I don't think anybody can deny that, and it's the need of the hour actually. But the question is, these disparate forces coming together, ones who were together, let's take specific political parties now. For instance, Samajwadi Party in Uttar Pradesh and Rashtriya Janata Dal and JDU in Bihar. What is it that they have common in their respective states? They will again continue to function as independent individual entities in their respective states. So what is it that they are actually bringing to the plate?
Well, if in the hypothetical situation that they actually merge and form one political party, their political profile will grow from that of a regional, state-based party to a national party, because at least 3 states are there: Karnataka, UP, and Bihar, and Haryana. Haryana. So, first of all, their profile, people will start taking them more seriously. And you asked about the egos of these leaders. I think it may not be right now at this stage when they are
down
and out to settle on a leader. I think they have Mulayam Singh Yadav has already taken the initiative.
The lead, yeah.
And as the senior most, I think Deve Gowda, because the JDS is too small.
Right. So it is actually, Neelabh, so it's actually a UP and Bihar initiative. and how much potential it has to spread beyond these two states to any great extent is still a matter of conjecture.
Well, if they form a nucleus, we talked about it last month, if you remember, when we had broken the story that this was going to happen. Then, they will get a nucleus, which if they set out wisely after that, you need a nucleus to attract other forces, other splinters, other things, but you need a nucleus. What has happened at present is there is no nucleus in the opposition now.
Right.
So the first task
The Congress which was there, Congress has lost
first
ground.
task for them would be to build a nucleus to which others come. So if they succeed in that, with a new, as Professor Aggarwal pointed out, with not just alternative programs but also practices, because what happens is opposition is now, where has the Congress given up space? The Congress has given up space on the streets. So you also have to fight some of the political battles on the streets. You can't just fight them in your respective states. So, and nobody left has given up that space.
Right.
So where is that? That space has to be built up.
So this nucleus, Professor Aggarwal, this nucleus, again, as Smita was pointing out, the issue of leadership, you think, can become within this. In
fact, frankly, I really hope that it does not happen the way it happened in the past. But given the history of these leaders, I am really apprehensive on that count. I would once again say that I really welcome this coming together of these leaders, and this is true that it is not only a political but also a social need. The point is that, you see, every political move theoretically is the articulation of a social need.
Right.
The point is that whether those who are articulating that social needs understand their historical responsibility or not. Are they true and honest to their historical role or not? That is my concern. So there is a need of opposition. There is a need of articulating popular discontents out there in the street and in these days out here in the social media and all that. So where are those kind of energies? Those energies would be there only and only if they have an alternative set of policies and alternative set of practices.
Manoj Kumar Jha, would you agree with that?
100%. In fact, something which I wanted to share, that whenever, people say that whether we have learned from history, we know whenever legislative opposition has shrunken, or for that matter, even in the major section of the media, you don't have oppositional space. You only have spaces for adulation, uncritical appreciation. Then these kind of coming together are important. And we are looking at the possibility of opposition in the streets, in every nook and corner. And must assure you today through your channel that we might be bothered by hundreds of things. Leadership issues, conflict over leadership, I assure you shall certainly not be the reason for that.
Okay, that's a real.
That would be wonderful indeed.
That's a very positive assurance there. Pavan Verma, very quickly, last words to you. So, what are at the end of this discussion, if you have to pinpoint that there is one challenge which is really something which will take some doing to overcome, if you have to look at it critically yourself, what would it be? Not the egos?
Girish, there is one cardinal principle. That is that history should teach us lessons for the future, but we should not become mortgaged to history or mesmerized into paralysis merely because certain things did not go rightly in the past. There are historical challenges. Politics is evolving. It's a dynamic process. Processes in the present throw up opportunities. Opportunities throw up the scope to expand them. And once that happens, the leadership issues are resolved. I strongly believe that while I fully agree that there are major challenges to overcome, so long as these constituents of the former Janata Parivar reflect as accurately as possible and with as much passion as possible the needs of the people, rather than be mesmerized by the shining India label that the new government presents with bullet trains and digital India and smart cities, ignoring completely large swathes of this country which need that assistance.
Okay.
So long as that is the situation, And so long as religious polarization will be followed as a policy, these parties have a relevance and we
Okay.
must adopt and correspond to them.
Okay, Pavan, thanks for that. I think, there seems to be, at least at the level of the spokespersons of this parties which are trying to reunify, there seems to be some clarity, but at the leadership level, what kind of clarity, how they will be able to overcome their egos, the past history and several bitter rivalries that they had will be something which we'll have to wait and watch. But this is as all my panelists say, this is a positive development because there is some space which has been left open, there's an attempt to occupy that space. Thanks to all my guests, Dr. Purshotham Aggarwal, Smita Gupta, Neelabh, Mishra, Pavan Verma, and Dr. Manoj Kumar Jha. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue in the big picture, same time on Monday. Meanwhile, have a great weekend.